Hey, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. Here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, going on a job interview, flirting, complaining, all the everyday bits of conversation that we do in our respective countries of origin, in our native languages, but here in Israel, in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topic you'd like us to cover. If we haven't in the past or you'd like us to go over it again, please be in touch with us. As always, our email address is hebrew@nbn.org.il. Nothing fancy there. It's Hebrew, Hebrew, @nbn.org.il. We want to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. If you're joining us live on Zoom, you can write it in the chat window here on Zoom, along with any other questions, comments, concerns you might have in general. Also, always invite you to check out our playlist on YouTube. That's YOUTUBE. For those of you who don't know the website, youtube.com. Type in Cafe Oleh or Nefesh B'Nefesh. You'll see a playlist of all of our previous lessons. You can go and review every one of our classes on demand, including getting the spreadsheet vocabulary that goes with each one. As well as if you're joining us live on Zoom, which means that you registered through us via Zoom, you'll get an email a few days after each week's class, with a recording of the class along with the spreadsheet as a PDF. Just two bits of housekeeping before we start today's class. One is if you do not get our emails for whatever reason, and it seems that everyone seems to have the same bug of not being able to get our emails, or at least a very small but vocal and minority of people, and we want to be sure that you get it. If you're not getting our emails, again, I gave you the email address. Please check all of your inbox folders. It may be in your spam. It may go to your trash automatically, whatever it may be. Please check. It's hebrew@nbn.org.il. If you aren't getting the recordings and spreadsheets, just bear with us. So it is not usually the day after. This does involve some human work in doing it. So we appreciate your eagerness to learn with us, but it's not going to be automatic, certainly after this class is over, not even the day after. So just bear with us. If you're still not getting the information, you can always go to YouTube. The same information that goes in the email is also on YouTube. You can just click in, find the latest class, and you'll get the spreadsheet. Vocabulary is a PDF, as well as the recording of the class. That's piece number one. Piece number two, after this class, we have two more classes before we take a break for the holiday season. I like calling it the holiday season, as our next two classes are going to deal with the holiday season, and it is very much a season, as opposed to a certain other time of the year that's called the holiday season. We have 3 weeks of nonstop holidays ahead of us that start in just a little bit. And the next few classes before we take a break before those holidays are going to be about preparing as we do in Israel, which is slightly different than abroad. Not just the words, but also life hacks, especially things like what to bring to someone's house if you get invited to a holiday dinner. Rather important. It does differ from country to country. It is unique here in Israel. We'll go through all that together. Then we're going to take a break, and we'll be back right after the holiday season, which I believe is the week of October 8th. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. You will get an email if you're already registered for us to find out more about that. So in our class before we get to the holiday season, we are going to do a little bit more of what we did last week. Last week, if you recall, those of you who joined us, we talked about how to read Hebrew without vowels. And it was both bringing in topics we've already discussed, such as the rules of spelling and pronunciation, and also some new ideas. And today we're going to go along with some of those new ideas to really emphasize them together. And as much as we can do with just about 200 people on this call, how we can do this together over the phone is really test how we can create new words and how we can understand new words, even if we don't know what they mean at first glance. And we're going to use all the context clues we talked about last week and a few others today. So with that, I'm going to open the spreadsheet for today. As always, If you have questions about this specific class, okay, this specific class, folks, please write it in the Q&A. Any other questions about any other topic, please write it in the chat. I will only be looking at the Q&A. Please try to keep your questions relevant to this class. I love how enthusiastic all of us are here, but oftentimes I get questions that I have to wade through in order to first prioritize this class's questions and then go to other ones if we have extra time. So again, if you have questions about this specific class, please write them in the Q&A. If you have questions about Hebrew in general that you'd like me to answer and we still have some extra time, you can write them in the Q&A, but please wait. Please wait to put them in the Q&A box until we get closer to the end of class. It's just me and the 200 people of you waiting through all those questions. I really appreciate your patience in prioritizing those questions that have to do with this specific class. So, excuse me. As you may recall last week, and let me just bring up a quick review of last week's class. Right, we talked about how to read Hebrew without nikud, the dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds, because modern Hebrew, just like ancient Hebrew and medieval Hebrew, is written without nikud. It's written without those. And once you use Hebrew enough, you know how to read it without it. As the Hebrew script is not an alphabet, as we talked about, it's what we call an abjad, where it uses letters to indicate consonants, not vowels. So as we talked about, and let me just pull up this one slide that we talked about last week, which is going to be the focus of today's class. Sorry, just one second. There we go. Okay. Right, we talked about this last week, the Mishkal or Mishkalim. Mishkal is one, Mishkalim is plural. A Mishkal simply means weight, W-E-I-G-H-T. It comes from the same root as shekel, modern Israel's unit of currency, because in the Bible, it is a weight. It literally means a weight, just like many currencies around the world are, in fact, stem from weights and measurements from previous times. We talked about how all words in Hebrew, in this case, nouns and adjectives, are formed with a root, right? 3 letters, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, and a mishkal. The mishkal are the vowel sounds, as well as some helper letters before, in the middle, and after the root that give further meaning and structure to what becomes the word, milah. Right, and as you see here, all Hebrew nouns and adjectives have 3 components. The root, like I just talked about, mishkal, all the different vowel sounds and extra letters we add, and suffixes to denote gender and plurality. Okay, just like for verbs, and we talked about that as well, but today we're only focusing on mishkalim. They come with their own meanings. So each one has its own meanings, and we usually talk about mishkalim, or a specific mishkal, using the letters kuf, tet, lamed, and we plug them into a mishkal to give us how do we pronounce it. So for example, the mishkal miktala, as you see here, has to do with places. The one maktela has to do with tools. Katil has to do with able and ibel as an adjective. Okay, and so we can reverse engineer when we're reading a sentence without nikud to figure out not only how do we pronounce a word, but even what it means based on does it look like one of these mishkalim. And there are 30, 40, even 50 different mishkalim. I sent you a link in last week's class to do it. You can look it up on YouTube after this class to see it. Today, we're going to go into depth of these 3 mishkalim and a few others to really practice recognizing a mishkal when we see a new word and how to decipher what the word means through context clue and some other clues. So let me just pull up today's class. Just one second. Escape. There we go. Okay. So you'll notice right away that while we are using a spreadsheet this week and not a PDF, there are some differences. For example, as you see here, there we go. As you see here, we added a few extra things. First off, English on the left, We're going to translate as we go. We're going to fill in this table together. So this is also a cue for anyone who's joining us live on Zoom and would like to join along, to follow along. Until you get this spreadsheet, you can use old school pen and paper or pencil and paper if you really want to get back to your elementary or secondary school roots, folks. This is the time to break out the paper. Okay, you're going to practice along with me how we're going to decipher all the words that you see where it says Hebrew on the right-hand side without vowels. We're going to learn how to read those words together by using the mishkal that each one has. So if you see on the left-hand side, the English, we're going to fill that out together. The second one over, column C, says mishkal, right? And I'm going to take you, these words are grouped based on the mishkal, right? Based on what are the vowel sounds and extra letters that help us turn these individual shorashim, these individual roots, into a word. We're also going to decipher the root, any other helper words that we can figure out from the same root, and transliterate together. Okay, so the way this is going to work, you see the only two columns that are filled right now are the Mishkal and the Hebrew. Okay, we're going to use both of them to pull apart each Hebrew word, right? We're going to find its root, its shoresh. We're going to think to ourselves, or aloud, if you would like, in your respective homes. We're going to think aloud if we know any words that have the same shoresh, and then we're going to figure out how to transliterate the word as well as to translate it, meaning how do we pronounce it and how do we translate it into English. So our first set of mishkalim are actually ones you probably know. These are what we call the verbal noun or the gerund of verbs. All verbs, just like in other languages, have an infinitive form, present form, past, present, all of that stuff. And then they have the verbal noun. This is the equivalent in English of ing, right? ing. ing is going, doing, speaking, saying. In English, as well as in other languages, this is both a verb and a noun. Same as in Hebrew. And we treat them in Hebrew as a noun, so much so that even though we can count this as a way to conjugate a verb, this is also considered a mishkal. And each of the different binyanim, five rather, of the seven binyanim that we use to create verbs and conjugate verbs also have a verbal noun. And we're going to go through them. You've probably heard some of these words before, or you've heard these vowel patterns before. That's the point here, folks. Even though no one, and I mean no one, not even native Hebrew speakers, ever learn all 30, 40, 50 mishkalim, they do learn how to recognize patterns. It's a basic way that all humans learn languages, whether they are at infant stage or at an adult stage. Anywhere in between, you recognize patterns and you see them repeat. Hebrew is logic, and it's all about patterns that repeat. So you're going to be able to figure out a lot of words simply not only based on their root, but also on their mishkal. Let's give an example. And the first one is a little tricky, but I trust you all are able to do things a little bit more challenging. So the first word that we have to figure out is this word here. Okay, I'm not going to pronounce it. You can pronounce it because along with the Hebrew, you have the mishkal. All you're going to do is first off figure out the shoresh, and then you're going to plug in the mishkal into that shoresh. So this shoresh, and I'll give it to you, is daled chet hey. Okay, if we put daled chet hey into this mishkal, we already know how to pronounce it, right? All those letters, that kuf, tet, and lamed, like I said, are just placeholders. You can think of them as X's or empty boxes. Okay, but they are simply placeholders. So if we were to plug in these three letters into that, we would get the word, let me hear all you say it, d'chia, d'chia. Okay, sorry, where are we? Here we go. D'chia. Okay, d'chia. Okay, d'chia means well, I'm not going to write what it means first. Other words that have the same root, you may have heard before, lidchot and doche. Okay, lidchot is to delay or to reject, and doche is rejection, is a reject, is I reject. Also in slang, it means something disgusting, something you don't want to deal with, something that is rejected. Okay, so the English is rejection, postponement, right? All these words. Okay, this is how we're going to go through this lesson. We're going to use the Hebrew word. We're going to take apart the Hebrew word, figure out its root, and then plug it into the Mishkal that creates the word to then figure out how to pronounce it and its meaning. Let's go to the next word. This word here, right? Those of you who are avid TV watchers, both in Israel and around the world, will know this word. It's the name of a very popular TV show for the last 20 years, I think, something like that. And this mishkal is hikatlut. Okay, the name of the mishkal is also how we pronounce all the words that are formed by it. It's that simple. It's really that simple. Just like tila corresponds to tchia, this is the same thing. So if the mishkal is hikatlut, and the root, as I'm sure you all figured out already, is samech resh daled, right? So how do we pronounce this? Hisardut or hisardut, depending on how you pronounce the letter resh. Okay, hisardut from the root, the shoresh sin resh dalet. Okay, hisardut. What is hisardut? What does it sound like? It sounds like another Hebrew word, lisrod. Lisrod means to survive. So hisardut, the act of surviving, survival. Okay, another one, kitul. Kitul is our next mishkal, and we're going to plug it into this word, which we can already quickly figure out. The root is daled bet resh, right? What words do we know with the same root? Pretty basic one. Ledaber, right? Ledaber. What does ledaber mean? To speak. Okay, kitul plugged into this word gives us the word dibur. Dibur, conversation, the act of speaking. Okay. Haktala is our next mishkal. We plug it into this word, whose root is chet, lamed, ta, tet, excuse me. Another word that we know from this is lehachlit. If you don't know these other words, that's all right. I'm giving you an extra clue here. All you need to focus on is the Hebrew word, figuring out its root, and then how do we pronounce it using this mishkal. Okay, so if the root is chet, lamed, tet, and the mishkal is haktala, then the word, as it's written here, is pronounced ach la ta. Achlata. Achlata, decision. Right? Lachlit is to decide, and achlata is a decision. It's the verbal noun of the word, of the verb lachlit. Finally, the last verbal noun before we get to some much more equally interesting words, let's say, is hitkatlut. Hitkatlut is the verbal noun of the binyan hitpael. And so we have this word here, which hopefully you can hear. Hitkatlut rhymes with this word. Even if you can't pronounce it, you can see that it's spelled, it's structured very similarly. And we can figure out that the root is kaf te taf bet. What words do we know from this? Things like lichtov, right, to write. Or the verb that's related to this specific word, maybe lehit katev, because this is hitpa'el, which is reflexive. So to write to one another, aka correspond. So this word is hitkatlut, hitkatvut. Hitkatvut is kor hitkatvut. Hitkatvut, correspondence. Okay, let's go through some other categories. Some of them we just talked about in that PowerPoint from last week and earlier a few minutes ago, but let's give you some more examples because again, these come up again and again. So we're going to talk about one we mentioned before, which is katil. Remember, all of these mishkalim use those letters, kuf, tet, lamed, as space holders. They tell us all the words have to rhyme with this sound in order to be part of this mishkal. And a mishkal typically has a meaning. In this case, it's an adjective, and it usually ends in the English equivalent of able or ibble. Okay, now, very important notice here, I guess is the term. Not all words that are created with this mishkal or any mishkal are translated exactly the same. Meaning, not all words that are created with the katil mishkal will end with able or ibble in English, right? And the reverse is also true. Not all words that are translated into English as able or ibble are from this mishkal, but this gives us a general way that we can understand words we don't recognize. So anytime you see a word spelled like katil, and as you see here in the Hebrew, right? All these words here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you see they're all spelled the exact same way. They take the 3-letter root, and in between the second and third letter, there's a yud. They're all spelled the same way, and they all rhyme because they're all using the same mishkal. So even before I know what these words are, you should be able to pronounce these words, right? Take a couple seconds, go through this list as fast as you can. They all rhyme with katil. That is the biggest clue you're going to get of the night, and what makes this so easy and logical. All these words rhyme with katil, right? Katil, katil. That's all you need to know. Plug those same sounds, those same vowel sounds into reading these words. I'm sure you got it all right. Let's go through them together. First one, achil, right? I know you all pronounced it correctly. Achil. Achil has the root aleph, chaf, lamed. What other words do we know with aleph, chaf, lamed as a root? We know perhaps the verb le'echol, right? Le'echol is to eat. Ochel, food, right? All the different words that have to do with food and eating. So if this root has something to do with words that have to do with food and eating, and I've told you that most of these words are all these words are adjectives, and most of them end in the English equivalent of able or ibble. What is an adjective that has to do with food that ends with able or ibble? I'm sure you all got it. Edible. Simple as that, right? The ability to eat something. It makes it edible. Let's do another one. Amin, right? Achil, right? This one is amin, right? Coming from the root, aleph, mem, nun, right? Actually, we would spell that with a. Yep. What words do we know with this root? We probably know the word emunah, faith, leha'amin, to believe, ani ma'amin, I believe, right? What do we think amin means? If it comes from this root that also means faith and belief and I believe. Reliable. Someone you can believe in or something you can believe in is reliable, right? Amin. Adjective. These are all adjectives, by the way, so they also conjugate. Achil, achila, achilim, achilot. Amin, amina, aminim, aminot. All these words are going to rhyme, like I said. So let's go to the next one. You already know how to pronounce it. Dalik, right? Dalik. Dalik has the root dalid, lamed, kuf. What words do we know that have dalid, lamed, kuf as a root? Maybe some of you know these words already. Delek, which is not only the name of a gas company, but it is a term that we use for gas and oil for cars. Gas specifically. Lehadlik, to light, as in a candle. Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat or shel Yom Tov, right? To light the candles for Shabbat or for Yom Tov, for a holiday. Lehadlik, right? So if this has to do with gas and to light, as in something that, what do we think dalik means? Flammable, right? Something that is able to be lit is flammable, dalik. It's really that simple. It's that easy to create words like this and to understand words like this when they follow these types of patterns. And like I said, there are many of these Mishkalim. These are some of the big ones you're going to see repeated all the time. And they give you context in understanding them. Even if you don't know the word. Another one, hafich, right? You already knew how to pronounce it. Hafich. Excuse me. Hafich. Words that we know from this, if you follow the news, you know this word a lot, this root in particular, which is hey, pei, chaf. We get the words like lehafoch, to turn, hafuch, upside down, as in cafe hafuch, upside down coffee, mahapecha, revolution or overhaul, aficha, coup. All those different words come from the same root. So if they all have to do with something turning around or turning this way or upside down, whatever it may be, what do we think hafich means? What adjective that ends with able or ibel sounds to this? Reversible. Hafich is reversible. Zamin. Zamin, right? We know it's zamin. All these have to rhyme, so we already know how to read all of these words. It's that simple, but let's figure out what it means. Zamin. Zamin has the root of zain, mem, nun. What words do we know that have this root? Pretty basic word, right? Zman, time. Also, lehazmin, to invite or to order something, right? So if we plug that all together, right? What does zamin mean in terms of time and able or ibel? Available. Chaviv. We talked about this word a few weeks ago when we talked about terms of affection and emotional spectrum. Chet, bet is the root. Chaviv, an extra vet there. There we go. Chaviv. Chaviv, what words come from this? We have tachbiv. Tachbiv. Come on, there we go. Tachbiv, which is a hobby. Chiba, which is affection. Lechabev, which is to like something or someone. Right? So I just gave you a big clue what this word is. If it has to do with hobbies and affection and liking something, chaviv, likable. Really that simple. Next one, machik, right? Machik. Machik has the root mem, chet, kuf. Excuse me. What words do we know from machik? We know the word limchok, perhaps. Limchok, it means to erase, right? So if the word that's related to machik is to erase, what do we think it means? given that this is supposed to be an adjective that ends in able or ibble, erasable. However you spell that, which is probably not the way I just did. We'll come back to that later. Erasable. Pronounced regardless, the ability to be erased. Something is, for example, a luach machik. An erasable board is a whiteboard, right? A board that you can erase. All right, nagish. Nagish. Nun, gimel, shin. Words that are related to this are lageshet, to approach. Lehangish is also another word. Okay. Nagish is accessible. Nagish. And finally, amid. Amid is a great word. Sorry, just 1 second. Amid, its root is ein, mem, dalid. Amid. What words do we know that have the root ein, mem, dalid? Right, probably la'amod, amud, like a column, la'amod, to stand. Sorry, just 1 second. Right, so what do we think amid means? Right, amid means it's able to stand up, right? It stands up against something. The immediate English is, hold on, let me just plug it in because the word is always escaping me, the exact, the able, ibble of this. You probably know it better than I do at this point, but you get the point, right? Each of these ends in able or ibble. This one, no less different, durable, right? Amid b'mayim. Hopefully your sunscreen in this very hot summer is amid b'mayim, means that it is withstanding water, right? It's durable in the water. It won't come off in the water. Okay, so now we just went through a mishkal. There are many, many, many more words that fall under this mishkal, which means that they take the root of a word, plug it into this mishkal, and we get all sorts of words, many of which will be an adjective, all of which will be an adjective, many of which will end in able or ibble in English, not all. But this is the way that we're able to read a word and deduce what it means. Let's go to another one. Okay, same idea that we just did. We talked about this one the other week. Maktela. We went from katil, now we're at maktela. Maktela, as it says here, is a feminine noun. It will always be feminine. And it's usually a tool or an instrument. It's something tangible that you hold on to. And the same way that we figured out the adjectives, all those words, is that we're going to figure out these words, right? So for example, ma'afera, right? Ma'afera has the root aleph, pe, resh. Other words with this root, efer, ashes. So what do we think ma'afera is? Ma'afera. And this word is a little tricky because of that aleph at the beginning. I'm not going to go into the details of it. We talked about it a little bit last week with the issue of guttural letters, and we talked about it in the past as well, but it is pronounced ma'afera. The other ones will follow the root that as you see here, the mishkal much more closely, but this is indeed part of this mishkal maktela. Now, if maktela is a noun that is a tool or an instrument, and the same root that gives us our word has in it the word for ashes, what do we think a tool for ashes is? You got to use your creativity here, folks. It's not so hard, but that's one of the joys of learning Hebrew. You got to use a little bit of creativity here. ashtray. A ma'afera is an ashtray. The tool for efer. Simple as that. Next word. How do we pronounce this word? If you said maglesha, you would be correct. The word is maglesha. Maglesha. Maglesha has the root gimel, lamed, shin. What other words do we know that have the root gimel, lamed, shin in them? Maybe liglosh, to surf, either on a surfboard in the water or to surf online. We use the same words, right? So what is a tool that lets us slide or surf? It's not a surfboard, although they are sometimes called a maglesha. This is referring to a slide, something that lets us go like that. Slide as in a slide at a park or an amusement park or wherever it may be is a slide, is a maglesha. Okay, madbeka, right? We knew how to pronounce it, right? Madbeka, maktela, mafera, maglesha. Madbeka, madbeka. Madbeka has the root dalid bet kuf. What words do we know that have dalid bet kuf? Those of you who lived in Israel in the last 3 years, you know this root very, very well. Giving you a big clue here, right? More innocent word perhaps we know is devek, glue. Nidbak, this is the word hopefully you remember or perhaps hopefully don't remember. Nidbak, right? Nidbak is infected. So what is a madbeka? A tool for something that sticks, perhaps? How about a sticker? Right? It's a tool either that uses glue or something that sticks to you, right? It connects to you. The idea of lehidabek is like this. For those of you with a stronger Jewish educational background, maybe the idea of a dibuk, a spirit that latches onto you. Same idea here. Madbeka is something that latches onto your clothing, a sticker or an object, another object, surface rather. Our next word, I love this word. This has its own classic Israeli song also about it, right? How do we pronounce this word? Mamtera. And what is the root of mamtera? Mem tet resh. This is one of those rare words where the root, the first letter of the root is mem. Typically, a lot of these words begin with mem because as you see, that's the mishkal, maktela. But in this case, both the word begins with mem and the first letter of the shoresh are mem. So it's mamtera. Okay, what word do we know from this? We talked about this when we talk about weather. Matar or mamterim. Mimtarim. Mimtarim. We actually had some mimtarim in the last day here in Israel. Matar is another word for rain. Mimtarim are showers. So what is a tool that creates matar, that creates a shower, rain shower or water shower? A sprinkler, a water sprinkler is a mamtera. Those big ones that you see in the fields, or simply someone that they have an individual one in their front lawn or back lawn, mamtera. Mamtera. Okay, this word you know already. I know you know this word. You probably didn't know it was part of this mishkal. Now it all is going to make sense really quickly and hopefully beautifully. What's this word? Matzlema. You know what this word is already, right? What is a matzlema? It is a photo camera. And how do I know it's a photo camera? Because it's part of maktela, so it's a tool or instrument that does what? If its root is tzadi lamed mem, right? What do we get from this word? We get the word tselem, image, litzalem, to photograph, lehitztalem, to be photographed, right? It's the tool that captures an image. It's the tool that uses an image, a matzlema. That's how this word is created, folks. Another one, makhela. Makhela, mak, mak, makhela, makhela, mak. Sorry, let me make that a little bit more clear. Makhela, right? Has the root kuf, hey, lamed, kuf, hey, lamed. Probably a lot of you know this root from other words such as kahal, a group of people, a congregation. Kehila is a community, right? Kahal, kehila, a community. What is the makhela? A choir. It's a tool in creating community, you can think of it, or a congregation. A little bit poetic there, but that's the word, makhela. And finally, mash'eba, because you knew how to pronounce it already, right? Mash'eba. Mash'eba has the root shin aleph bet, and it's related to the verb ishob. Ishov. You've probably heard this word before. There's a holiday mentioned in the Talmud, Simchat Bet HaShoeva, the holiday about the Bet HaShoeva, the water pump station, right? Ishov is to pump. So a mash'eva, excuse me, is simply a pump. Simply a pump, mash'eva, from the same root that gives us the verb to pump, plugged into the mishkal maktela, we get the word pump. Okay. Let's get to two more, and I'm going to take your questions. Because again, there are many, many, many of these mishkalim. And remember, the mishkal is simply the vowel sounds, the nikud, the dots and bars, plus helper letters that help us create a word out of these shorashim, these three letters, right? So we just did maktela. Now we're doing miktala. Miktala is also a feminine noun, and it has to do with places. So these are all going to be names of places, not towns and cities, but places as in destinations. You'll figure it out very quickly. Okay, so take this root, take this word, plug it in here. Again, the first one's going to be a little tricky because of that first, excuse me, aleph, but it is indeed part of this mishkal. I think we got a question about this last week as well. It is indeed part of this. Let's start figuring out what this word is. The root is aleph, pei, hey, from which we get the verb le'efot. Le'efot, to bake, right? And someone who does baking, aka a baker in Hebrew, is an ofeh or an ofa. Okay? So if this is a noun, this word here, and it's a place where it's related to the words le'efot and ofeh, ofa, to bake and a baker, what is the logical assumption that this word is? A bakery, right? And the word is ma'afiyah. Now again, just because this word does not rhyme immediately with miktala doesn't mean it's not part of it. That first aleph makes it a little wonky, and there's a whole very complex explanation as to why it's ma'afiyah. I'm not going to go into it. So just trust me on this. This is indeed miktala, and this is how we can figure out this word. By understanding its construct, even if we didn't know how to pronounce it, that beginning mem and that hey give us a clue that this is related to the mishkal miktala. It has to do with the place, also the context of this word, where you're going to see it and when you're going to see it, make it about bakery. It can't be anything else. This word is definitely pronounced just the way as miktala. You know how to pronounce it already? Midracha or Midracha, depending on how you say the letter Rish. Its root is Dalid Rish Kaf. I know you knew it. What words do we know from it? Derech, way, right? Lidroch, to walk or to step. So what is this word? If it has to be a place and has something to do with walking and a way. If you said sidewalk, you were correct. Midracha is a sidewalk. It's the place where you walk. That's how the word was created. The place where you walk, midracha. Midracha. Next word. Many of you probably know this word very well for if you had a Jewish educational upbringing, midrasha. Right? Same thing. Daled, resh, shin is its root. We get words like drasha that come from it. Midrasha. I'll write it here. Midrasha. Midrasha is a place where you go to get or hear a drash or a drasha. It's a place of learning. It's a spiritual house, a place of learning or getting insight into Jewish wisdom, right? So how are we going to call this? A place of Jewish learning. Okay, this one is a fun one. I really like this one. First off, figure out what the root is. You can pronounce it and you'd be absolutely correct. It's midsha. It's a little hard to pronounce because it's a couple letters that don't cooperate in the way that we'd like to think in other languages, but it's midsha. What's its root? What word do we know that has this root? Just as it's written, deshe. Deshe is grass, as in like a big bed of grass. And so midsha is the same thing as what I was about to say, but I didn't. A midsha is a lawn, the place of grass. Midsha. This one you've probably heard before. It's not pronounced exactly the same way as miktala, again, because of that first letter, but you know this word, right? What is this word? Machlaka. Machlaka, and its root is chet, lamed, kuf. What words do we know from it? Lechalek, for example, to divide. And we probably know this word already, right? Machlaka. Machlaka is a department. The place of division of subjects, right? The place that is divided up is a department. So, mach, la, ta, ta. Okay, these next three, actually, you're gonna have to use your imagination and creativity again. I know you have it. It's gonna pay off really well. Okay, this one. This one is not pronounced exactly as miktala, but it is part of it. It's a tricky one, but I know we can figure this out together. Where have you seen this word before? You've seen this word before. You may not heard of it pronounced before, but you know this word. Okay, what if I tell you that the root is yud, det, dalid, ayin? Okay, what words do we know with the root yud, dalid, ayin? We know the verb lada'at, as in ani yodea, I know. Meda, information. Okay. Modi'in, intelligence, as in like collecting intelligence, not as in individual. So what is a moda'a? It's a place where one gets meda or modi'in, information. What is that in proper English? An advertisement, an ad. Whether it's a physical one on a piece of paper, or it's online, or it's on TV, a moda is an advertisement, a commercial. right? Mo da a. Again, this word is considered miktala, even if it doesn't sound like it. We can still use the same deduction to figure out it is a place. This one also is going to do the same thing, and it also has the same sound as moda'a, and it rhymes with moda'a because its root also begins with the yud. So if I told you the root is yud ayin tzadi, and it's pronounced, it rhymes with moda'a, so it's moatza. Okay, moatza. Missing an O there. Moatza. Okay, moatza. What other words do we know with yud ayin tzadi? We know the word yoetz. Yoetz is an advisor. Yeutz is advice. Yeutz is advice. So a place of getting advice. What do we think that is? Again, be a little creative here. A place where we get advice, a council. Moetza is a council. This is very important as we get closer to municipal elections, as all Israeli citizens and permanent residents will be able to vote, and you will vote for the head of your municipality or council, local or regional council, or a municipality, depending on the size of where you live, as well as for the council, the people that sit around the head, right? So moatza, council. Two more words. One is also related to what we just talked about. What is this word? Mimshala, or memshala as we say it, right? Which has the root mem shin lamed, mem shin lamed, memshala, 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 government, the place of governance, right? Limshol is to govern. So the place of governance, the government. And then finally, milpa'a. Milpa'a has the root resh, pe, aleph, right? What words do we know from this? Refu'ah, rofe, right? We know the words healing and the words doctor, male and female, of course, rofe, rofa. So what is a milpa'a? It's the place where healing happens, where the doctor is. In everyday language, a clinic, specifically a medical clinic, right? A milpa'a. It's that simple, folks. We take the mishkal and how we pronounce it, the extra letters and the vowels that go with it, the nikud. We plug in any of these roots and many more into it, and we create new words. In this case, nouns. One last category. We've done this before. I like this one. It's a really interesting one. And then I want to take your questions. Again, this is your cue. If you have written your question about this specific class in the chat, now is the chance to write in the Q&A because I will only be looking at the Q&A. So if you have questions about this specific class, please write in the Q&A now. Okay, this mishkal is katelet, excuse me, katelet. Katelet is a feminine noun, and it often, not always, often has to do with a disease. And you're going to see why with these specific words. Some of these are really a stretch of imagination. Some of these are a trip through history, and some of these are brand new words. One of them is a brand new word that is a kind of a disease. So let's talk our first word. And again, because the mishkal we're using here is katelet, all these words are going to rhyme with katelet. It's that simple. That's what the mishkal is. It gives us meaning and it gives us pronunciation. That's all a mishkal is. Okay, so katelet, all these words are going to rhyme with it. The first one, you know what it is? Daleket. Daleket katelet. Katelet daleket. It rhymes together, right? So it's daleket, right? We already had dalik before, right? And dalik has the same root. Dalid, Lamed, Kuf, and it had to do with lehadlik, right, to light, and delik, which is gas. So what do we think a disease that has to do with lighting has to do with? Again, you got to be a little creative here and think about your English as well, because a lot of modern Hebrew is reflected in Indo-European languages, the languages that many of the first Zionist pioneers spoke. This would be inflammation. Daleket is inflammation. Any part of your body, daleket. Okay. Next word, nazelet. Nazelet has the root nun, zain, lamed. Nun, zain, lamed is related to the word nozel. Nozel is liquid. A disease that has to do with liquid. Nazelet is the word. Nazelet. We're running out of time, so I'm going to quickly write it here. Is a runny nose. Okay, nazelet is a runny nose. Agevet is a really interesting word. Agevet. You're not going to get this one, and I'm going to tell you why. So agevet is actually related to a food that all of us eat on a regular basis. Most of us eat agvania. Agvania. Agvania is a tomato. Agvania is a very strange word, and it was created in the early 20th century by one of the Zionists, not by Eliezer ben Yehuda, we usually hold up as being the pioneer of modern Hebrew. He hated this word. He wanted to boycott this word altogether. Why? Because the root of this word, Ein Gimel Bet, in biblical and medieval Hebrew has to do with lust. The idea was that the color of tomato represent lust and lustfulness, whereas all the other countries of the world used two different words, tomato. Tomato has to do with its original word in Nahuatl in Central America, or a variation on the Italian pomodoro, right? A apple of light. In fact, in Arabic, it's bandura, which comes from the same root. But for some reason, even though this word was shunned by many people, it stuck, agvania, and it has to do with lust. So this word, a disease that has to do with lust. Think early 20th century, folks. Syphilis is a givet. Still is used to this day, even though that context is not necessarily understood, much less you probably didn't know where the term agvania came from. Not the most modest of fruits, how shall we say. A givet, or vegetables, however you want to define it. Okay, let's go fast. Sahevet. Sahevet comes from the root sadi, hey, bet. You know a word that has the same root, tsahov. What is tsahov? The color yellow. Disease that has to do with the color yellow, you'd be right if you said either jaundice or hepatitis, right? Because one of hepatitis' symptoms is that you have jaundice. You have yellow colored skin or eyes because it's a disease of the liver. So tsahevet, hepatitis, or jaundice. Tsarevet. Tsarevet has the root tsadi resh bet. Tsadi resh bet gives us the root, the verb, litzrov. Litzrov is to burn or to roast or to char, or those are often the terms that you see when you're in a restaurant in talking about something. Or back in the days when we used to create our own CDs, CD mixes, we would litzrov disc. We would burn a disc. Tsarevet, a little bit of what I just did. Tsarevet is heartburn, right? The disease of burning, in this case, in your esophagus. Heartburn, tsarevet. This one is a really interesting one, folks. Shapat. We've talked about this word before. You know what this word is. What is this word? Shapat, the flu. It comes from the root shin pe ein. One of the words we get from this same root is lehashpia, to influence. Notice a word that sounds very similar to the English to influence. About influenza. Shapat is a modern invention of a word, and it comes from the way that we have the word influenza. Influenza comes from 15th or 16th century Italian. Influenza, the idea is that if you got this disease, you were under the influence of the stars. It simply got truncated to influenza. So just like the word shapat is related to the word lahashpia, to influence. Shapat, flu, aka influenza. Okay. And finally, the last one, as I said, it's the modern invention. It is a disease, just not the same as these other ones. Sachevet. Sachevet comes from the same root as samech chet bet. Lischov is a word that's connected to this. Lischov is to drag something, along the floor, to drag it on your back, whatever it may be. So what is a disease that has to do with dragging something around? Bureaucracy. This is the word for bureaucracy. You can say bureaukratia, but the proper Hebrew is sachevet, the disease of dragging something for a long period of time, bureaucracy. You can also call it red tape if you'd like. We also have nayeret, coming from the word niyar, paper. Nayeret is paperwork, the disease of papers. Just like sachevet, the disease of dragging something, bureaucracy. A great word, a great use of this mishkal katelet. Okay, like I said, we have many, many mishkalim in Hebrew. They help us create new words. Because you saw, all we did here, plugged in all these different shorashim into these vowel patterns and letters that create a mishkal, that both give us pronunciation guides and meanings. We plug them together, we get a word. Shoresh, the root, times mishkal gives us a milah, a word. In this case, as you're looking at this spreadsheet, column C times column D equals column F. Mishkal times root, shoresh equals milah, word. Okay, I'm going to stop here, answer as many questions as I can with what little time I have. Q&A, folks, only. How do you know which mishkal to apply to the shoresh? This is a great question, folks. This is not as simple as that. This is not about applying a mishkal to a root. You're not creating words. You can. I give you all that poetic, creative license to do so. What we're doing is reverse engineering words that we can't read or we don't know at first glance. Remember, we started with the Hebrew word on the right-hand side without any vowels. We took it, we saw what other words it both looked like in form and what shoresh it has to figure out what mishkal it is, and therefore what word it's related to. We're using the mishkalim as a bench guide as to how words are connected to one another. But these words in column F are really the epicenter here. If I'm reading something and all of a sudden I get to row 18 here, okay? And there's context around it. There's other Hebrew words and sentences around it, but I don't know how to pronounce this word. I can figure out, based on the context, what mishkal it's in, and therefore how do I pronounce it and what it means. Because once I figure out the root is aleph, pe, resh, and I can rule out it's not a place because the context that's provided in this sentence makes it clear this isn't a place, but it's a thing. Maybe it's a ma'afera. I've heard that term before at a restaurant or a bar. It's an ashtray. And that makes sense here because it's talking about someone smoking. Okay, context is going to be key here. We're doing this in a vacuum. You are not using language in a vacuum like we are now, but we are pulling apart the words in column F according to their root and their mishkal to figure out how best to read them and understand them at the same time. Great question. Believable instead of reliable for Amin? Yes, you're absolutely right. It could be both reliable and believable. But that's the same idea, right? If someone is Amin or if something is Amin, it's believable. Yes, it can also be reliable. I get what you're saying, but yes, it can mean both. How do we say all the katil adjectives in the feminine? Like I said, achil, achila, achilim, achilot. Chaviv, chaviva, chavivim, chavivot. זמין, זמינה, זמינים, זמינות. מחיק, מחיקה, מחיקים, מחיקות. נגיש, נגישה, נגישים, נגישות. עמיד, עמידה, עמידים, עמידות. They all do the exact same thing. We did cover last week, someone's asking about the dagesh, whether it's on top of a shin or a sin, or in the letters beged kefet. We did cover that last week. It is in the presentation for last week, which is already up on YouTube. But yes, we did indeed cover when to read it and when not to read it. What is a midrachov as opposed to a midracha? Great question. So midracha, like we just said, is a, right? Midracha, we just had up here. Where was it? Midracha is a place of walking, a sidewalk. What is a midrachov? Well, what does midrachov sound like? In English, we also have this same idea where we combine two words to create a new word, as opposed to a compound word, which remain two separate words. This type of construct is two words that are pushed into one. What does midrachov look like? If I just said that midracha is a sidewalk, you would be correct in saying it is midracha. If it'll let me do this, just 1 second, so you can all see. Excuse me. Right? Midrachov is the combination of the word midracha, and rechov, street. Sidewalk in a street. Midrachov is a pedestrian mall or street, right? Now you know what that thing is in Jerusalem that for some strange reason, despite not being popular for many, many years, people still flock to, and there's really not much to do there. Midrachov. A midrachov is simply a pedestrian mall or street. We now have plenty more of these elsewhere in the country. Here in Tel Aviv, we have one on Nachalat Binyamin in the evenings where they turn the street into a midrachov, meaning it is inaccessible by cars. It is nagish baregel, right? Accessible by walking, by foot. But midrachov is midracha plus rechov. Midrachov. Great question. Someone also reminded me another great disease. If we take the word for dog, kelev, we plug it into katelet here, what do we get? Kalevet. What is the disease of the dog? Rabies. Are there exceptions to Mishkal? 100%. I made that very clear, and a big disclaimer at the beginning and end and throughout this class. Yes, there are many words that do not ascribe to these forms, right? Just because a word is using miktala as its pronunciation guide doesn't necessarily mean it's a place. And if it's a place, it isn't necessarily using miktala. First off, there are many, many, many more mishkalim that have to do with places. And there are words that are made by using miktala that don't have to do with the place. These are still guides that give us a good context clue, a good guess, an educated guess, that fancy word we use when we were taking standardized tests way back when, an educated guess. These are all educated guesses to figuring out Hebrew that doesn't have nikud. How do you know from the root what is the mishkal? Again, context will make it very clear. I can only read this word based on what the context is as daleket. There are very few, if any, other words that are spelled this way that would be pronounced anything other than daleket. I don't know of any other words that are pronounced using this spelling and in a different way, in a different pronunciation than daleket. I could make something up, but it would be wrong, and therefore I'm not going to say it aloud. It is daleket. I know that by looking at this word and the context in which I'm talking about this word, which is in the context of mishkal katelet. But if I was talking about something, it would have to do with someone's health, right? Again, context comes from experience, which comes from practice. Just like in any language, that's how context is used. Why sidewalk rather than destination? First off, because the word for destination in Hebrew is yad. Midracha is a sidewalk. It is the place for walking. Okay. We need to stop here as we are well over time. So again, toda rabah, thank you all so much for joining. As I said, these last two classes have been about grammar, but they're really important in cracking the code, how you can use Hebrew in an everyday way. And the everyday way we use Hebrew written is without nikud. So as difficult as these classes may be, they're really important to get you quickly moving on to reading Hebrew like native Hebrew speakers. That being said, next week and the week or the week after, we're going to be getting ready for the holiday season. It's a big deal in Israel. We're going to take you from Aleph to Taf, A to Z of how to get through these 3 weeks of holidays, starting next week when we're going to talk about sales, what to look for, what's being advertised right now, but in supermarkets and beyond, and social etiquette for holidays, specifically not going through each holiday, but what's expected, for example, if you are invited to a holiday dinner, what to bring in Israel, and how is it different from the rest of the world. Until then, check your email, check YouTube in the next few days for a recording of this class, as well as the spreadsheet that we went through together. Toda rabah, thank you all so much, and lehitraot. See you all very soon.